Bear, Independent, Brief, 23 February 22. The effects of Russia's invasions of Ukraine are beginning to blossom around the globe. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has called on allies to impose sanctions on Russia, and the EU has already unanimously agreed to issue sanctions targeting officials in Russia, officials and key private citizens, aka oligarchs. Biden announced sanctions against banks, including the Military Bank of Russia and the National Bank of Russia, saying the U.S. would issue, quote, comprehensive sanctions on Russian debt and would fully block two large financial institutions. Germany has halted the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline process, which has been a decade in the making and which was seen as the key political chess piece to be played if Russian aggression continued in the Ukraine. This is a profoundly profitable accomplishment Russia has been seeking for some time, the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. The pipeline is an $11 billion project that was finished a decade ago and is only waiting for certification from Germany and the European Union. For context, Germany is in a vulnerable position, as it is one of the few developed nations that opposes nuclear power. Yeah, see how far that's gotten you. And it imports more than a third of its natural gas from Russia. VOA News wrote, quote, U.S. President Joe Biden waived sanctions against the pipeline's operator last year in exchange for an agreement from Germany to act against Russia if Russia used gas as a weapon or attacked Ukraine, end quote. This comes at a time when energy prices are already inflated in Europe, causing many families to suffer. Commodity prices are skyrocketing because of what's happening in Ukraine, and as oil prices shoot higher, cascading effects can be seen blossoming throughout the global economy. The U.S. dollar is an international medium of exchange, and that dollar is, in truth, backed by oil. This means that crude oil prices drive inflation. So whatever happens to oil affects the decisions of the Federal Reserve. According to Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, quote, it is really about oil rather than the other, wheat, palladium, and nickel. Oil is probably up $10 or $15 a barrel because of the conflict. That will probably add, if sustained, about 30 or 40 cents a gallon to unleaded gasoline. That's as much as a half percentage point to year-over-year consumer inflation, and we're already allegedly at 7.5%, which does not include food or energy in that equation. Continuing with his quote, my sense is it really complicates the Fed's efforts to rein in inflation and get back to full employment. And if you're on Patreon, you have the relevant links to this morning's brief. And if you're not, you don't. Patreon.com, search for Bear Independent, you'll find us there. I appreciate y'all very much who support the show. It's $5 per month. Best $5 you can spend on the internet. There's more than 2,000 exclusive pieces of content that have never seen the light of day on YouTube there at Patreon. Now, it's important to understand as far as the home field ramifications for us here in the United States and elsewhere, those that aren't in Russia, aren't in Ukraine, aren't in Belarus, aren't in Poland, aren't in Germany, which is many of us. Regardless of how hot the war goes in Ukraine and where the war in Ukraine stops, we will, because of our globalization, the enmeshed economies of the world, we will feel the ramifications of Putin's actions in Ukraine. Service disruptions very likely in the United States of America. It's possible that if the United States gets involved in the conflict in Ukraine, which thus far it's saying it won't, but if it does, it's very possible and plausible that there is a large-scale or a series of large-scale cyber attacks on the United States of America. And while that may not seem like that big of a deal on the surface, denial of services, and the removal of adequate communications from the infrastructure here in the United States of America means you won't be able to get your money out of a bank. It means possibly that communications go down. And without communications, we have no logistics. And without logistics, we lose things like transportation and refrigeration. Potentially very bad news. Many have said that there is a chance that if this goes global and if this goes to guns, that Russia could engage in preemptive nuclear strikes against the United States of America. There's a lot of prepper channels right now talking about that. Or EMPs, high-altitude detonations of nuclear weapons to produce an electromagnetic pulse. It's important to understand that if Russia was to do something like that, and I would say that's possible, but not plausible at this time, based upon what we know currently. If Russia was to do something like that, understand that the use of nuclear weapons, whether they are high-altitude airburst, low-altitude airburst, or impact detonated, that's the use of a nuclear weapon against the sovereign soil of the United States of America. And regardless of how weak our federal leadership is right now, and regardless of what a joke the commander-in-chief is right now, the United States will retaliate to that. And we may be a sham of what we once were currently under our current leadership. However, we still spend more than the next 17 countries combined on defense. We still have far more aircraft carriers than any other country in the world. We have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of well-trained soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. We have extraordinary nerds at Space Force. I'm looking at you, Storms. We have a lot of capability. The question is if and when we deploy that capability and to what scale we deploy that capability. And that ultimately is what has the vast majority of preppers, preparedness-minded individuals concerned right now. So, brief overview of where we are in the last 24 hours. Russian President Vladimir Putin has recognized the DNR and LNR regions of southeastern Ukraine. These are contested areas, have been since 2014, where there are Russian separatists, aka people who are in league with Russia, yet are in Ukraine, who have been vying for independence in these regions, the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. These regions, these separatist regions, DNR and LNR, Lima November Romeo, Delta November Romeo, have been recognized by Vladimir Putin as of yesterday. Putin has sent Russian military forces into these regions across the Russian border into southeastern Ukraine to the DNR and LNR on an air quote peacekeeping mission. Love him or hate him, I can appreciate the fact that he has called it a peacekeeping mission because that flies in the face of what the UN and NATO do all the time. And he's essentially saying if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. The major point of concern here is that the representative governments in DNR and LNR do not control the entirety of those regions. They control about 1/3 of the landmass of those regions. And so Russian forces are currently, as we speak, being used to secure the entirety of those regions. Ukraine has not deployed their military to those regions yet. As of the time of this recording, approximately 9:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, 23 February 22. Subject to change at any moment because this is a highly fluid, rapidly evolving situation. This means that there are Russian forces that are operating inside the sovereign areas of Ukraine under the guise of peacekeeping missions to secure areas that are not currently controlled by either Russian separatists or Russia proper. Additionally, Putin is in talks today with the Duma, which is the upper house of the Russian parliament, which is a bunch of puppets that do whatever Putin says, to recognize Crimea as a breakaway republic as well. That's important because Crimea was, in 2014, the catalyst that started this entire Russian incursion into Ukraine. The Ukrainian leadership, governance, has days ago bugged out from Kiev. They were in Lviv or Lvov, or however you say that in Ukrainian, up until yesterday, which is approximately 20 miles from the border of Poland. They are now, based on some reports, in Poland proper, have made it across the border. Reporting on the ground is very intermittent, and first reports are always wrong. There are whispers in the OSINT community, open source intelligence community, that hit lists have been put out for Ukrainian leadership, Ukrainian governance, and key public figures in Ukraine. Their locations, their identities, the identities of their families, and if they are found, again, rumors only, if they are found, they are to be executed. We have been postulating for months that the limit of advance for the Russian troops would be the Dnieper River as they move from the eastern border of Ukraine west into Ukraine proper. It now appears, based upon Putin's rhetoric, as well as the positioning of Russian BTGs or battalion tactical groups around Ukraine, that they are going to take all of Ukraine. We know Putin's long-term strategic goals are to reinstitute something, the Russian Federation, to turn the Russian Federation into something that approximates the USSR, of which the Ukraine was a backbone of the USSR, for food production, for industrial production, for defense production, for aerospace, for technology. During the Cold War, the United States of America was as or more concerned with Kiev and Ukraine as we were with Russia and Moscow, because of the assets that are in Ukraine. Ukraine has wanted to join NATO since 2014. That has been tabled for a long time. In fact, at one point, it was whispered that Ukraine would be allowed to join NATO, and that was not an issue. Now, Putin has made it an issue, I believe, simply because it becomes the onus for his actions in Ukraine. I would encourage you strongly to do more digging on the background of this conflict, because there is way too much to go over now, and have this brief be relatively brief. Poland is very upset currently. They find themselves yet again possibly on the front lines of a war between the Western powers, NATO, and the Eastern powers, Russia and its sphere of influence. Polish diplomats are encouraging strongly members of NATO and European Union members to remember them and not forsake them, because they do not want to be caught on the front lines again in between NATO and Russia. From thedrive.com, and it's going to take a hot minute for this to load, which is why we are pre-recording today's content, because my internet is down, because we are on the cusp of a massive ice storm in eastern Oklahoma. NATO's eastern flank to be fortified by U.S. F-35s, AH-64s, attack helicopter 64, aka Apaches, and troops. The Pentagon says it is sending U.S. Air Force F-35A Joint Strike Fighters, as well as U.S. Army AH-64 Apache attack helicopters and ground forces to various locations along NATO's eastern flank. Now, remember that Russia has BTGs, battalion tactical groups, now numbering somewhere between 150 and 200,000 troops to the north of Ukraine and Belarus, to the east of Ukraine in Russia, to the south of Ukraine in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, and to the southwest of Ukraine in Moldova. Ukraine is essentially surrounded. Well, to the west of Belarus, you find Poland. And Poland is one of these NATO allies that is being backstopped right now. Back to the article. President Joe Biden announced these deployments, which all involve elements already positioned in Europe, earlier today. He said these moves were in direct response to continued presence of thousands of Russian troops in Belarus that together with other forces arrayed across Russia's borders with Ukraine, which I just discussed, remain poised for attack in that country. This also comes after the Kremlin ordered troops to disputed Ukrainian territories yesterday, which Biden said constitutes an invasion. As part of these deployments, as many as 8 Air Force F-35As presently in Germany will disperse to several operating locations along NATO's eastern flank, according to a statement from the Pentagon today. A contingent of 20 Army AH-64s in Germany will head to unspecified locations in the Baltic Sea region. In the Baltic Sea region and in the Sea of Azov, there are now numerous Russian ships, 20 to 30 Russian ships in that theater, and their LSVs, or essentially maritime landing crafts, are being actively loaded with troops based upon eyewitness reporting on the ground. Another 12 Apaches currently in Greece are set to relocate to Poland. Lastly, an Army Infantry Battalion task force consisting of approximately 800 personnel will deploy from Italy to the Baltic Sea region. These additional forces, this is a quote, "These additional forces are being repositioned to reassure our NATO allies, deter any potential aggression, and train with host nation forces," the Pentagon statement said. Quote, "These moves are temporary in nature and are part of more than 90,000 U.S. troops already in Europe on rotational and permanent orders." The Pentagon did not say specifically what units would be providing these forces. Also from thedrive.com, mysterious symbols are appearing on Russian military vehicles near Ukraine. Can you see that? The Z inside of a box. Russian army and other Russian military vehicles gather around Ukraine's borders and potentially now within the country after Russia began sending troops into 2 separatist areas of eastern Ukraine in the Donbas region, began appearing with different symbols painted on them within the last couple of days. This may well point to an imminent expansion of what the U.S. government has now termed a new invasion of Ukraine. So far, photos and videos that have appeared on social media show a range of different symbols, the implication presumably being that these will be used for rapid identification on and around the battlefield. This is especially important when large numbers of vehicles are headed in different directions and require marshaling by troops or other security forces on the ground who may not be immediately familiar with their units and objectives. Up until now, tanks, artillery, rocket launchers, supply vehicles, and fuel trucks have all been noted with these markings, but not all of them are marked, at least not so far. The symbols mainly applied using white paint include the Latin letter Z within a square or triangle, as well as the simpler triangles and circles. In at least one instance, however, a T-90 tank unit has been noted with a red triangle together with a numeral. The possibility here is that the red signifies the guard status of the unit in question, an honorific title bestowed upon Russian military units with particularly notable combat records. So, these marks could indicate a more widespread invasion of Ukraine, not just into the contested regions of DNR, LNR, and now possibly, as of this morning, Crimea, but the entire country. And also from the Drive, Russian forces are now authorized to use force in Ukraine. Russia's parliament has approved the use of military force in Ukraine, an authorization that President Vladimir Putin could potentially use to launch a larger military intervention into that country. This comes a day after Russia sent troops into 2 separatist areas of eastern Ukraine's Donbas region, shortly after recognizing them as independent countries. The U.S. government has now termed that deployment as an invasion, which may trigger the imposition of an array of major sanctions on Russia, to which Russia does not care. Sanctions are very likely, in fact, I would damn near bet my life on it, something that Russia has factored into the cost of doing business in this invasion into Ukraine. Not only because we've been telling them for weeks, if not months, that they were coming, but because they're not idiots. They factored this in already. They've priced it into the cost of doing business in Ukraine. And Russia has lots of energy, and the world needs lots of energy, and they're also quite friendly with China at the moment, who is happy to take low-cost natural gas. Putin sent a letter seeking this authority to invade to the upper house of Russia's parliament, or the Duma, earlier today, a proposal that lawmakers quickly rubber-stamped. If nothing else, this will give Russian troops deployed in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, or DNR and LNR respectively, the ability to use force against threats in those areas. How do you determine a threat? That depends on what their ROEs are. My guess is they're not incredibly narrow. Though this is largely a formality, it is still a significant one. It would seem that, at least in principle, this would also authorize the use of Russian forces outside of the DNR and LNR to support forces there, as well as potentially engage targets elsewhere in Ukraine as part of a larger intervention. The article goes on from there. From the Washington Post, Ukraine prepares state of emergency. Russia vows to resist U.S. sanctions. Ukraine announced plans Wednesday to declare a state of emergency as the nation prepared to defend itself from an expected Russian invasion. The 30-day state of emergency, subject to approval by the parliament, would impose curfews and restrict mass gatherings in certain regions, if necessary, to confront Russian aggression, the chief of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council said. It follows a call-up of reservists as Ukraine braces for Russian President Vladimir Putin's next moves. Currently, in the contested regions of DNR and LNR, people are seeking shelter in bomb shelters and basements. Yesterday, I believe it was 90-plus artillery shells fell, according to reporting on the ground, fell from the Russians into those regions today. Thus far, it has already been 80-something shells that have fallen. Schools are closed, businesses are closed, people are hiding in their basements. Those that can are bugging out. Poland is prepared to receive an estimated 1 million Ukrainian refugees. There are lessons in here for us that are into preparedness. I tell you all the time, don't be where the battle is. Have good bug out indicators. Know when to leave. Back to the article. Reacting to a first wave of U.S. sanctions after Russian troops deployed into the two pro-Moscow separatist regions of eastern Ukraine, Russia warned that Americans will fully feel the consequences of President Biden. Biden has acknowledged that the crisis could lead to higher gasoline prices, while U.S. businesses have been warned to prepare for possible cyber attacks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced yesterday, that he was calling up the country's military reservists after Russian lawmakers voted to give Putin the authority to send troops into eastern Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday canceled the meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov scheduled for later in the week, saying the Kremlin's moves against Ukraine demonstrated that it is not serious about diplomacy. And Russia has cautioned Ukraine against cutting off diplomatic ties after Zelensky said Tuesday he was weighing a request from his foreign minister to sever relations after Moscow decided to recognize the two breakaway areas of eastern Ukraine. The European Union is unveiling a strategy to free itself from Russian gas. Germany is looking at ways to get gas beyond Russian imports. As stated, Ukraine is in a state of emergency, and there are now grassroots militia-type movements in these contested regions of Ukraine in order to withstand the Russian onslaught. So things are getting interesting there. Again, to recap, what do we primarily need to be concerned about? If the United States gets involved in Ukraine, whether as a sovereign nation or as part of NATO, we very likely will experience Russian backlash which will include cyber attacks, potentially could go hot. As of right now, the only thing that's on the table as far as a response from the United States and NATO are sanctions. It appears to be that the powers that be have decided, have agreed to, have relinquished control of Ukraine to Russia. If Russian aggression proceeds beyond the borders of Ukraine into NATO regions, an attack on one is an attack on all. And there will have to be a military response to that aggression. If that happens, we could be looking at the start of World War III. This is not to scare you. This is so that you can think logically about what your next moves need to be. We are not given to a spirit of fear. Do your basic prepper stuff. Stock up on food. Top off your fuel. Have a way to stay warm. Have an emergency plan. Charge your radios. Dust off the old bug out plan just in case you need it. Go through your bug out bag and make sure your stuff is squared away. Check the tire pressure on your vehicles. Make sure your bug out indicators are good to go. Make sure you have good threat indicators as an early warning system that in case this thing goes hot, you know where you're going and what you're doing so that you're not trying to figure it out while your hair is on fire. We will continue to watch what is happening in Ukraine. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe to stay tuned. We do intel briefs regularly, a minimum of 3 days per week on this channel, oftentimes more, both on YouTube and on Patreon. Things are getting serious, but they're not so serious yet that I would consider it an imminent threat to the American way of life, which is why we're keeping an eye on it. Now, to pay my bills. RefugeMedical.com. My company, handmade, made in America, guaranteed forever, first aid kits for military, law enforcement, EMS, firefighters, and civilian sheepdogs like you everywhere. 33 lives saved to date. Use promo code BEARNATION for free shipping on everything in the store. Everything in the store is HSA and FSA eligible. HSA rolls over, but FSA expires March 31st, approximately 5 weeks from now. Use it or lose it. Bearfax, the Bear First Aid Kit, which exceeds military specification, is a comprehensive first aid kit to work the March algorithm, massive bleeding, airway and respiratory, circulation, head injury, hypothermia, and everything else. Is about a 4-week fulfillment time right now. Again, made in America, guaranteed forever. SOB kits, the small of the back kit, which is great for your war belt, your plate carrier, or the headrest in your vehicle. We have those in stock. Highly recommend you check them out. We also have the bare minimum in stock. Highly recommend you check that out. Buckets are in stock. Wound care buckets for long-term preparedness are in stock and shipping quickly. We have a few adventure kits left in stock. The adventure kit is for everything from band-aids to bullet holes to broken bones. In stock, made in America, upgraded contents, guaranteed forever. We only use the best stuff from North American Rescue, H&H, Medline, TACMed Solutions, and other top-tier vendors for all of our medical components. RefugeMedical.com, 33 lives saved to date. Supply chain's not going to get any better. If we go hot with Russia, get them while you can. Get them while you can. You also have 5 days left to get your ungovernable t-shirt from BearIndependent.com. 5 days. The 28th of February, we're done. They will cease to exist. You can never get them again. So if you haven't already placed your order, get them now. The ungovernable t-shirt at BearIndependent.com. Again, thank you to all the patrons for supporting the show. If you're new here on YouTube, welcome. The best way to support the show here on YouTube is to share this out with somebody that needs to see it, to subscribe, and to ring the little bell icon. And with that, have a blessed day. Shalom.